Hey everyone, it's Dr. Hayes. In today's video we're once again doing my reading wrap-up. So this is my stack of books for the month. I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. However, just like a little extra thing, I usually film these videos like the first week of the new month, so usually the first week of September. However, I am going away the first week of September, so it's actually still August when I'm filming this. So even though I have read these 9 books, I do have another book that I am still reading. I started it yesterday, so this is going to be my last book for August. I'll finish it by the end of the month. This is Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher, which by the way, oh my god, look at gorgeous. So just because of the time of my flight is when I'm going on holiday, I wouldn't have time to film this before I go and like get it edited and get it up for the first week of September. So I'm gonna talk about this in my September reading wrap up at the start of October instead. So I'm not gonna go too much into it, but I like it so far and it's also gorgeous. It's also signed by the author. So yeah, otherwise, apart from that one, so I will in total have read 10 books by the time I finish the book. I'll have finished it by the end of August. So today we're just going to talk about these 9 books instead, and honestly overall didn't have the greatest ones. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed quite a few of the books I read, but also I hated 4 of them. So that's almost half, you know what I mean? Like, so not great. And also like I always August is my birth month, so I'm like, August has to be the best reading month for me out of the whole year. And last August, I found like 2 of my favourite books of all time. This August wasn't so good. So we're just going to get into it and I'm going to keep it as spoiler free as possible as I go through and review everything. And with that in mind, I'm going to talk about 2 of the books I hated the most this month. To the point I'm not going to tell you what star rating I gave the 2 of them, but it's only because I don't feel like it's fair for me to tell you what I rated these books, because I feel like these books weren't what I was looking for and I basically wanted to ask for recommendations, so it's basically a case of neither of these books being for me. So the first one is Arthurian Myths by Jake Jackson, or edited by Jake Jackson, and this is the Oxford Guide to Arthurian can't say any words, Literature and Legend by Alan Lupac. Basically, I have wanted for quite a few months now to write a fantasy novel, and as part of that fantasy novel and the whole like world, I want to have my own like myths and legends like as part of the world. However, despite wanting that, it's like a big thing for me to want, to be honest, like quite ambitious for me, since honestly I don't know a great deal about myths and legends. It's just something I have like a hole in my like general knowledge of the world. I know like the very common ones, stuff like Icarus and like Medusa, but like when it comes like to mythology specifically, I really don't know a great deal. So I bought these 2 books, and I have other myths books that I haven't read yet, as basically as like to first of all fill in my knowledge, but also to like show me how myths are written, the kind of common themes in them, which I did learn from these books, where like a lot of the characters like represent something. So for example in Icarus he represents ambition as something. They're often about a common theme like love, betrayal, revenge, friendship, something like that. So I did learn that from these books. I did find it useful, but they're not quite what I was looking for. I think what I'm looking for, because these are basically, this one had a good introduction, but the rest of the book was just the myths themselves, and this one was more of like a history of mythology about King Arthur. However, it was more like about the authors who wrote the tales in the first place, which really isn't what I was looking for either of them. I think what I'm looking for, what I need specifically for this project, is basically something that does have the myths in, but also comes with an analysis of it. Kind of like the edition of The Art of War I read. It had The Art of War in it, but then it also had an analysis of The Art of War that kind of basically told you what it down, broke it down for you. And as someone who is coming at this who doesn't know a great deal about any kind of mythology, King Arthur, Greek, Roman, do the Romans even have myths? I don't know. Norse, Egyptian, whatever. I don't really know a great deal. So that's why I'm not going to give you the rating for these books, because they weren't bad books, they just weren't what I was looking for. So if anyone knows of any books that are like that from any kind of mythology, doesn't have to be King Arthur mythology, I would be really, really grateful. So I'm not going to tell you what I rated them, because I don't think they're bad. They're just not what I was looking for. So just wanted to start with those 2. However, that being said, as much as I really didn't like those two books, I absolutely loved this one. I gave it 5 stars. This is The Beach Trap by Brady, which I believe is the pen name for 2 friends, which is really cool. I could never imagine writing a book with someone else. I think someone would frustrate me so much. I'm not very good at teamwork when it comes specifically to writing. I am for other things, but not for writing. Anyway, this was gifted to me by my American best friend, and honestly, she has bought books for me in the past. However, the previous 2 books she sent me, I absolutely hated. So I was like, she doesn't read a great deal, so we don't talk loads about books, which is fine. We talk about other things. So I don't think she really understands my taste, which is fine. Like, I haven't really told her. But again, because she doesn't read a lot, she's therefore also not sure what I would like. So she just goes and picks things randomly, which I kind of love. So I'm like, I'm never really sure what I'm gonna get. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I did judge this book hard by its cover. I was like, this is just gonna be like, I feel terrible. I was basically like, this is gonna be like a trashy novel. But it wasn't. It was actually so good. So as you might tell by the title, The Beach Trap, it's playing off The Parent Trap. So it's about these 2 girls and they basically meet one day at like summer camp. We don't really have summer camp here. So basically my only like reference point for this is the start of The Parent Trap and also Camp Rock. So they meet, they get on really, really well. However, then one day, Kat, which is this character, one of the camp counselors comes up to her and is like, hey, actually you're going home now. We're really sorry, your granddad's just died. So her dad is on his way to pick her up. So the other girl, Blake, is like, don't worry, I'll help you pack and I'll come with you to meet your dad. You must be so upset. So everyone else is off doing their own thing at camp and they're waiting together for Kat's dad to arrive. Kat's dad arrives and Blake's like, hello dad, you are also my dad. So they have different mums. So it's not exactly like The Parent Trap. It's basically a dad who is married to Kat's mum. He cheats on her and Blake is born, but he still has a relationship with Blake's mother. However, at one point Blake's mother dies and the dad just stops seeing Blake altogether. And when she sees him at summer camp is the first time she has seen this man in like 2 or 3 years. So not only is she shocked to find out, hey, you're also my friend's dad, but also like, where have you been? However, it then kind of skips and the girls have no more contact. The dad never speaks to Blake again. And Kat is basically convinced that Blake, at 12 years old, engineered all this. Like, she's 12, Kat, get over yourself. However, the dad dies and in his will, he leaves to his 2 daughters, his only children, this beach house. However, they all have different reasons. Basically for Kat, she used to go to like every summer she spent there, she'd go to 4th of July parties there. This house really, really means a lot to her. So she wants to keep it in the family. However, Blake, she comes from a really different kind of social circle, different kind of class than Kat does. She needs to pay for a care home for grandpa. He has dementia, so she's like, we need to renovate this and sell it. So first of all, the novel is about them renovating this rundown beach house, but it's also about them coming back together as sisters and learning what it really means to be sisters, because they never really had a relationship where they knew they were sisters. They met at camp as friends and then they were separated until their dad died. So it's really nice, it's really sweet. I honestly didn't expect a lot from it, but it was so good. They both have a love story in it with different men and they were really, really good. It was just so good all the way through. It was certainly a really, really easy read. But I really, really enjoyed it. I did find Kat very annoying because I was just like, Kat, could you just shut up at certain points? But it was so good and I like how at the end they just brought back in so much of the imagery from the start of the novel. I really wasn't expecting a lot from it. But it was so good. I loved it so much. If you're looking for an easy read that's also summer themed, I know we're getting to the end of the summer, but this was so good and I am sorry for how harshly I judged you, but it was so good. However, this next one didn't enjoy so much. This is A Sanatorium by Sarah Pearse, which has the ugliest sprayed edge ever. It matches the title, you know, but like, gross colour. Anyway, I gave this one 3 stars. I don't often read like true thrillers. I read often a lot of books, like an adventure book that has like elements of a thriller in it or fantasy with elements of a thriller in it. I don't often read true thrillers. It's not that I don't dislike them, it's just like, I just never reach them. I'm usually, when you go see me in a bookshop, I'm usually in the fantasy and sci-fi section. So there's not a ton of like true thrillers in that section. But anyway, so I was like, I thought I'd give this a try. And it was, first of all, a very easy read. If I'd had the time, I definitely think I could have sat down and read this in an entire day. I don't often have the time for that. I think I would have been able to do that once this year, which was with the new Hunger Games, and I specifically set the time aside for that. So it was a super easy read. The majority of the chapters are under 10 pages, which I think for a fast read, having shorter chapters just makes you feel like you're just really tearing through it, you know. It helps with the pace of it. And I liked the premise, the setup for it. So basically Ellen, the main character, she is in the police. However, she is on a break due to something traumatic happening, and she and her boyfriend Will have been invited to a luxury hotel in the Swiss Alps called the Summit, which used to be a sanatorium. She's been invited there by her brother for his engagement party, but she's a bit about going because she also has a traumatic past where her brother is concerned. The book is about a lot about trauma, basically trauma all over. However, a year prior, the architect for the hotel went missing. When they arrive at the hotel, someone else goes missing, and then a couple of days later, Ellen's brother's fiance, who works at the hotel, which is the reason they're having the engagement party there, also goes missing. There's obviously something going on. However, they are high up in the mountains, an avalanche comes, they are cut off from everywhere else, it's too windy to get a helicopter there to get people out because there's a murderer on the loose, so Ellen is basically communicating with the Swiss police over the phone to see what she can do to help protect people. So I like the premise of this being isolated in this hotel, very much Until Dawn vibes. I love Until Dawn, it was great. So I like the idea of it. However, the mystery itself, no. I just feel a lot of the time, so Ellen, you know, be called to the scene of the crime, she do some investigating, and she's like, oh, I have noticed X thing. However, she will then put 2 and 2 together and get 8, and I'm like, how did you get from that to that? Doesn't explain it, she just makes these massive leaps in logic, and I was just like, I understand the author knows who did it, okay? I get it, I understand the author knows that. But I was just like, huh? And then when it's finally revealed who the killer is, who the one who's been doing this is, whilst I did like their reasoning why, I thought it was extremely good, like I said, the whole book is about trauma, I felt in terms of the mystery writing, it just wasn't good enough, basically, because often when I do read thrillers, I used to read a lot more prior to this year, it's not always obvious who's done it, but when it's revealed, you're often like, oh yeah, of course, I see it now because they did this thing or they said that thing. I was like, oh yeah, of course, yeah. There was literally one clue that it was the person who it was in this book, and it was literally one line in the whole book. So I was just like, no. So it just really wasn't satisfying to read. So yeah, didn't enjoy it. It was an easy read, but I was like, no thank you. So now we're going to talk about A Treachery of Swans, which I absolutely loved. I gave it 4 stars. It's by A.B. Poranek. I showed it to my friend and he was like, oh, it's a Polish last name. He's Polish. I was like, ah, cool. So that's probably not how you pronounce it. It's also gorgeous. Did I buy it because of that? Yes, but also because it is a retelling of like Swan Lake, basically. So if you've been watching me for any length of time, I am absolutely a sucker for anything that's like a retelling of a fairy tale. I know Swan Lake isn't a fairy tale as such, however, it's like a classic story like a fairy tale is, so I was like, sign me up, let's go. And it's also a sapphic retelling of it, so I was like, one of my goals this year, which I've completely and utterly failed at, is to read more LGBTQ plus fiction. I think I've read like maybe 2 things over the course of the year, so I've done terribly, so it's gonna still be my goal next year to do. So that was another reason for me picking it up, and I absolutely love the book. So it's basically, it sounds like it's set in France. They use a lot of French words to describe stuff, like the market, like the town square, the theatre and stuff. So I am assuming it is set in like a fantasy version of France. And basically the main character is Odile, and she works kind of at like the theatre, and her father basically uses her to like steal stuff from different patrons. However, in this world, magic has been lost because someone imprisoned one of their goddesses. She's called Morgane, but I'm pretty sure she's based off Morgana, I think. I do know who Morgana is. I've seen the entirety of the BBC show Merlin. I know who Morgana is. But basically Morgana is responsible for all the magic in their world, but she has disappeared and no one has any more magic and the world is slowly dying around them. So Odile's father is like, look, the prince is at the right age for marriage. If you can get in there and get married to him, at the wedding they bring out the king's crown, and the king's crown is the only piece of magic left. If you can get the crown, we can bring magic back to this world. So Odile is like, cool beans. Now, even though there's not a lot of magic in the world, there is some magic still remaining, and they basically use the last of it to swap Odile with Marie de Odette. Marie de Odette is basically like a noble lady's daughter from a different adjacent land to them, and Odile was friends with her when she was a child because she was undercover as a maid in the palace for a bit. However, Odile had feelings for her, but because of their social standings, nothing ever happened between them. So basically, Odile lures Marie to the lake behind the theatre, and her father turns her into a swan, and Odile, by wearing a necklace, is able to pose as Marie de Odette and basically woo the prince to get him to marry her. So I absolutely love the setup, and honestly what I like about the retellings of classic stories like this is seeing how they use all the different elements of the original. So obviously in this it's the two girls with the swan motifs and stuff like that, the lake turning into a swan at different times, stuff like that. I really enjoy seeing how it's reused in other stories, so I absolutely loved all of that. However, the reason why it's not a full 5 stars is for 2 things. The first of one is the relationship. When Odile starts to basically re-fall in love with Marie, it was very cute, it was very sweet, but it just kind of seems to happen out of nowhere, and I was a bit like, okay. However, and I do quite like this, Odile basically becomes she's absolutely besotted with Marie. She's obsessed with her. She's like, I could stare at you forever. It's really cute to read. However, I never really got the feeling that Marie returned her feelings. I was just a bit like, is Marie as into this as Odile? And I was like, perhaps no one can be as into this as Odile is, because Odile was really into it, but I was like, I felt like Odile was giving 100 out of 10 and Marie was giving about a -5 out of 10. So I was like, they were coming at this from really different levels of obsession. I did think it was sweet, it was nice to read, but I was a bit like, okay. And then the other thing was the ending. I obviously can't say too much because I think it would spoil it for people. But honestly, I really liked the story of the novel up until the end of the last chapter, and then it was the epilogue. And I wish there was no epilogue, and I wish there was a sequel instead, because I loved it that much. I was like, get rid of the epilogue, let's have a sequel, let's carry on. So yeah, that would be my wish. So, but yeah, otherwise really, really enjoyed it. However, up next, a novel I sadly didn't like, which I was really disappointed I didn't like it, which is Disobedience by Naomi Alderman, which I gave 2 stars. The reason I'm disappointed is because I absolutely loved The Power by Naomi Alderman. I think everyone should read that book. I read it back in February when I was on a cruise. Absolutely loved it. Think it was amazing. So I actually picked this up when I was at 66 Books earlier this year. I didn't even read the blurb. All I saw was Naomi Alderman, so I grabbed it and I put it in my basket. I was like, it's Naomi Alderman. Of course. That was basically my thinking. However, I sadly didn't end up liking it at all. So I really enjoyed the base premise of the story. It's personally something really different from what I've read in the past. So it's basically about a girl called, I believe it's pronounced Ronit, but it might be different. I did look it up and I've already forgotten, I'm terrible. Terrible at pronouncing names. And basically she's British, but she's been living in New York for a number of years now. However, her father dies, so she comes back to England. However, it's a bit more, there's more to it than that, because her father isn't just her father, he is a rabbi and he is the Rav of the community. Now, I'm not Jewish, but from what it's described in the book, I believe the Rav they are a rabbi, but they're more than a rabbi. They are an absolute pillar of the community, which I do believe rabbis are pillars of the community, but the Rav is meant to be absolutely everything. So he dies. So this entire community is devastated, and Ronnie turns home to sort through his personal effect. However, she is also confronted with her past when she arrives back, because this whole story takes place in the area she grew up, in Hendon, in London, which I've never been to before. Sounds like a nice place from the way it was described. However, as you may have guessed, considering Ronit's father, she was raised as an Orthodox Jew. However, she no longer practices like that anymore since moving to New York. And one of the reasons she no longer does is because of a relationship she had while she was there with one of her classmates who was a girl. So I do believe in the story Ronit is bisexual, but I don't think it actually explicitly states it. I just kind of got that from the partner she talks about, but perhaps she's not. But it doesn't actually say, so I don't know. And basically she was in love with her best friend Esty, and Esty, even though she ends up married to a man, I do believe Esty is gay, I think. Again, it doesn't really put labels on things, so I'm not actually 100% sure. That's just what I gleaned from it, but I definitely could be wrong. So she was in love with Esty and they had a relationship, but it all eventually broke down, and Ronit left. And since then, Esti has gotten married to Ronit's cousin, who is basically next in line to be like the next rabbi. I don't really know how rabbis work and stuff like that. It doesn't really sound like it's a job you apply for like other things, so I'm not really sure. So basically, not only is Ronit, you know, confronted by the bad relationship she had with her father, and coming back to a religion as well as a culture that she no longer really views herself as part of, she's also coming back to all these old feelings that she had for Esti. So I found the whole premise of that really, really interesting. However, the relationship between the two women just really basically confused me. So when it kind of does a flashback to when they were teenagers, when they were in high school together, Ronit, she is like absolutely head over heels in love with Esti. However, Esti just seems like, alright. She just seems very lukewarm to it. And then when Ronit comes back, she's absolutely gone for Ronit. She's so glad she's back. She's like, my god, the love of my life, you're back. And I'm like, cool. However, when Esti tries to make a move on Ronit, Ronit's like, no, stop. And it's not because Esti is now married. It's not like out of a moral thing like, oh my god, no, even though I have feelings for you, you're married, we can't do this. It's like, I don't really have feelings for you anymore sort of thing. But then they kind of get together anyway. So I was just like confused by it basically, their relationship. So I was like, okay. I was just like, I don't feel like the two of you are on the same page. I don't know, perhaps it was meant to be portrayed that way because Esti is married and Ronit's been in all these toxic relationships when she's been in New York. Bit unsure there, but I was like, what is going on here between the two of you? I don't know. And then the other reason I didn't really enjoy it was the actual writing itself. So I found the story very interesting and the different things it confronted. I'm not Jewish, so I was learning a lot of things I didn't know. But I was just like, there were some very important details that were just glossed over and just told directly to the reader and then never mentioned again. They weren't given any other attention, they weren't shown to the reader. It was just really blunt sometimes and just, yeah, perhaps that was the point of the book, but I just and the writing itself. I enjoyed the story, but I didn't enjoy how the story was told, basically. And I was just so disappointed in it because I really, really loved The Power by Naomi Alderman. So yeah, sadly, did not like. So the next book I want to talk about is The Little Sparrow Murders by Seishi Yokomizo. Apologies for my pronunciation. This is by a Japanese author. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, and it's actually the 6th in a series. However, okay. I didn't know this at the time I bought it. However, I will say I don't actually think you need to read these in order. They did read very much as like, whilst it's got like a recurring main character and he's like got his recurring friends, it was like kind of like a standalone kind of novel in like a series, if that makes sense. It kind of sounds like each novel in the series is a different mystery and they're very isolated, and then the next book it moves on to a different mystery and doesn't reference anything in the past. There were no references really to things in the past in this novel. So I was still able to read and enjoy it, and I want to go back and read the other ones. It was so good. So basically this is about like ace detective Kindaichi? Sorry, definitely not how you pronounce it. And he is like, you know what? I've done too much mystery solving here in Tokyo. I need to go on holiday. So his friend, also a detective, sends him basically to the middle of nowhere to Onikobe, which is near the larger city of Kobe, which I do know how to pronounce because there was an earthquake there. I did it in geography class. The only reason I remember things. Earthquakes. However, as he's like sending him on this trip, he was like, you know, like 20 years ago, there was a horrific unsolved murder there. And he's like, I'm going here on holiday. I don't want to be there solving a murder. So he goes there to solve a murder. However, it's like partial cold case, but partial reignited cold case because the murderer's back in town, basically. Things start happening as soon as a detective arrives back in town, and it's all based around like a bit like, I suppose, like a nursery rhyme, but more sinister than that. I guess honestly a lot of British nursery rhymes are quite sinister. Like I think Ring a Ring a Roses is supposed to be about the plague and stuff like that. So I do think a lot of nursery rhymes do have quite sinister stories to them, although from the way it talks about it in this book, it doesn't sound like this is like a a well-known nursery rhyme in Japan. It sounds like different prefectures and different towns and stuff, depending on their traditions, have like their own nursery rhyme, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't know that. So basically the murders follow this nursery rhyme. So I was like, oh, cool, interesting, fun. So I really like that. However, since the murder victims are honestly really central to the plot of the book, I did find it a little bit jarring that literally almost none of them have any presence in the novel, like, at all. You're kind of told, yeah, this person exists, and then 2 chapters later they die. So I was like, I felt the book would be more impactful considering like what you find out at the end, which I thought was amazing. I absolutely loved what the story behind everything was. So considering what you find out at the end, I thought the book would have just been so much more powerful had the murder victims been established just a little bit as their own characters, you know what I mean? So I was left a bit about it. However, it didn't stop me wanting to read the other books in the series, and it was so good. So I'm gonna try and find whatever the first one is. This was the 6th one, but it was really good. So my penultimate book for August for this video is Wisteria by Adalyn Grace. It's the last, I think it's just in the Belladonna series, I think they're called. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And actually this is by far my favourite from the whole series. I've said in, when did I read Foxglove? It was either last month or the month before. I said in that video that I find Adalyn Grace's writing style quite janky. This one didn't have any of that jankiness, so I don't know what happened between the 2 books, but it's completely gone. So I was like, oh my god, amazing. Loved it. So the writing, I was like, great, yeah, amazing. And honestly, I much more preferred reading about the relationship between Blythe and Aris than I did between Signa and Death. I just felt between Blythe and Aris, perhaps because it was enemies to lovers, but I just had so much more passion and fire behind it, and the conflict between them, I was just like, this is what I like in romance books. I do feel you can portray passion between people without them having to hate each other at first. But yeah, it was just a solid relationship. Absolutely loved it. And there's also this amazing section where Blythe's father comes to visit them after they've gotten married, and she's lied to him in her letters and say, oh yeah, we're in this amazing kingdom and it's snow everywhere, so Aris has to create this palace and this whole world for her father to see so he doesn't know there's something going on. And it was just, oh, it was absolutely amazing. Absolutely loved all the detail. It was so great. So the reason it's not a full 5 stars then is because of basically what happens from after the halfway point, where a new kind of like entity shows up. So in the first one we have Death, and in the second one Fate, Aris is introduced. So it kind of stands to reason that there are other ones, which I already knew that. However, the big plot thing in this book doesn't really start happening until after the halfway mark, where someone called Chaos arrives. Which in theory, I liked the whole idea and I liked what was going on, but I just really felt it was too late in the day, basically too late in the book, to introduce a whole new character who had such importance and such power that they could do what they threatened to do, and only introduce them over the halfway mark. They really should have been there within the first quarter of the book, in my opinion. I'm definitely of the opinion that major characters, all major characters in a novel, should be introduced before quarter way through. They don't have to necessarily do loads before that, but just let us know who they are, introduce them, you know what I mean? They don't have to do loads, just have Chaos be there. Maybe not do anything right away, but just let us know that she's a thing that exists, you know what I mean? It was just too late for me. I was like, no. So that's the only thing I didn't like about the book, but otherwise, I absolutely loved it. I think it's by far the best one in the series. Honestly, I don't care about Signa and Death. Aris and Blythe all the way, they were amazing together. And the final book I want to talk about is The Silver Chair from the Chronicles of Narnia. This is the 6th book, the penultimate book in the series. I'm going to be reading The Last Battle. Is it the last battle? The final battle? I'm pretty sure it's the last battle. In September, so I'll be finished with the Chronicles of Narnia series next month. But I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. Not one of my favourite Narnia books, but I still really liked it. So this one has the main character of Eustace, and whilst I hated Eustace at the start of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, by the end of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader I really liked him, so I was really glad he was back for the Silver Chair. And basically he goes to the boarding school from hell. Where basically the teachers don't care and basically all the bully students rule the place. And he kind of makes tentative friends with a girl called Jill who is hiding from the bullies one day. And a lot of English boarding schools, not all of them, but a lot of them are in the British countryside, kind of like among fields and stuff. So they hear the bullies coming, so Eustace is like, oh come on, let's get away from them, and they end up leaving the school grounds through a gate into what they think is going to be like a farmer's field, but they end up in Narnia. And basically they are given a task by Aslan to find Prince Caspian, now King Caspian, but the Caspian from Prince Caspian and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, to find his son. Caspian at this point is very, very old. He is like days away from death, and his son has been missing for years and years and years, and it's up to them to find him. And upon their adventures they also become allies with what is basically a scarecrow. Why not? I love the scarecrow. He was great. So I really enjoyed it, thought it was great. I really loved Eustace in this. I really like Jill's character as well. I don't know if they're going to be in the last one, I'm not sure. Really, really enjoyed it. I loved the ending as well. But I was just a bit like, the silver chair itself is in like 2 chapters of this book towards the end. So a bit like problem with Wisteria, it was just like introduced too late. So I was a bit like, no. So I just felt that was a bit weird. I liked what it was used for, but I felt like if we maybe had some hints prior to that and there was some like silver chair red herrings, because they go to loads of other places. They like go on a trip around like the northern areas of Narnia to try and find Prince Caspian's son. There were other red herrings and stuff about silver. I think it would have worked more, but there weren't. Like Aslan was like, this is a clue or whatever, but he didn't say anything. So I feel a bit weird insulting Aslan, honestly. But so yeah, I did really enjoy it, but I just felt like some of the follow through could have been a little bit better. But anyway, that is basically everything I read in August, obviously, apart from Hemlock and Silver. This is basically like a Snow White retelling. You can kind of see the kind of books I like. So I'm going to carry on reading today. I'm only 90 pages in. I really like it so far. So I will update you on this one next month when I am back from my holiday. But anyway, I would love to know what you thought of what I read this month, and of course love to know what you read in August. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!